Hi all, welcome to today's Cybersecurity Visuals Challenge Kickoff webinar. My name is Chelsea and I'll be the host of today's call. We're really excited to have you tuned in from various time zones and countries today. Good morning from San Francisco, which is where I'm sitting right now. Before we jump in, I wanted to just share a bit of housekeeping to make sure we're organized for the webinar. Please try to stay muted during the call to just limit the background noise. We'll be sharing a screen for the first 20 minutes or so, and then we'll turn it off so that we can all see each other during the panel discussion. If you're able to, leave your video on as well. If you'd like, you can leave questions in the chat box, and we can follow up with the recording afterwards. Dima, who is one of our hosts today, will be helping in the chat box. If you're worried we may not get to your question, don't worry. We've got an email address where we'll get back to you. So with that, let's jump into some introductions and backgrounds of who's joining us on the call today. So as I mentioned, my name is Chelsea, and I am a program manager with OpenIDEO, helping to run this Open Innovation Challenge alongside Hewlett Foundation. So here at OpenIDEO, I've worked with many foundation and government partners across topics such as disability and inclusion, youth employment, and education in emergency settings to run initiatives with our partners. My background's in managing programs and partnerships in the social impact space, and I'm really excited to be working at this intersection of human-centered design, open innovation, and impact to learn more about what it means to scale within communities globally. So I'm excited about this challenge specifically because I believe visual language really has the power to shift narrative and to change behaviors. So I'm excited to get into the panel discussion later today. Dima, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. You've probably seen me on the platform already. My name is Dima, and I'm a human-centered designer and community fellow at OpenIDEO. I'm here to support the community with this challenge, with the cybersecurity challenge. What I usually do at OpenIDEO is as a community fellow. So I work on supporting innovative ideas using design and using human-centered design. My background is in visual communication, coupled with design research and service design. And I'm very interested about the intersection of social impact, social innovation, and design.
Thanks so much, Dima. I'll just spend a few moments talking about what OpenIDEO is. OpenIDEO is IDEO's open innovation practice. So we really believe that today's complex challenges require more collaborative networks that better nurture innovation, share knowledge, and coordinate action. So open innovation, what is it? It's a collaborative approach to social impact that brings diverse people together to share their ideas, build on each other's insights. And we really have seen that openness and transparency drives change further and faster. And our hope is that with OpenIDEO, it enables people all over the world to come together and create solutions for today's most pressing societal problems. So why do we exist? Back in 2010, IDEO asked the question, how can we really open up our human-centered design methodology to enable people everywhere to spark innovation where it's needed most? And so the answer was OpenIDEO. So we've been around since then. We're coming up on 10 years soon. We're really proud to share that we have a new CEO this year. Her name is Sandy Spiker. This is a picture of her. She's an educator, she's a systems designer, and she's worked a lot in the social impact space, particularly in education globally. So we're really excited to be working on this challenge and are thrilled to introduce our partners today. So I'll pass it over to the Hewlett Foundation. They can introduce themselves.
Thanks so much, Chelsea and Dima. Hi, everybody. I'm Eli Sugarman. I lead the Hewlett Foundation's grant making on cybersecurity and internet policy issues, what we call the Cyber Initiative. I've been at the foundation about 5 years now. I come to philanthropy from the government, from foreign policy, from security policy circles. And this is the most creative project that we are supporting, and just very excited to see it grow and develop. That's a bit about me. Monica, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Eli. My name is Monica Ruiz. I'm the Cyber Initiative and Special Projects Fellow here at the Hewlett Foundation. I've been at the foundation for a little over 1.5 years. My background is I worked for the Department of Defense for a couple of years before going into graduate school. I focused primarily on security policy more broadly, but specifically cybersecurity. I then lived abroad in Estonia, and again, my focus, my research was more cybersecurity strategy. And now I am happy to be a member of the Cyber Initiative team at the Foundation.
Great. Thanks for that, Moni. Chelsea, do you mind bringing up the next slide?
Yep.
And I'll just note that Monica and I did not coordinate both wearing blue today, which, as you might know, is clearly a color that is a theme in the creative brief and everything. That was just, a happenstance. So the Hewlett Foundation is the family foundation of the Hewlett family, of Hewlett-Packard fame. We don't have any connection to HP Enterprise or HP Inc. We are a large private philanthropy, a 501c3. Roughly speaking, we're the 5th largest philanthropy in the United States, and so we're very active on a range of very complex policy challenges, ranging from combating climate change to improving education in the United States to addressing global development challenges, women's access to reproductive health care and economic empowerment, performing arts. Those are some of the major areas the foundation's invested in. And really our approach to philanthropy is trying to be strategic. That is trying to say, what is a problem that we think is of global import? And then what is more or less sort of an engineer's approach to solving it? What are the different solutions? And then thinking through what is the right sized solution the Hewlett Foundation can try to execute against. And so we're based in the Bay Area, where we trace our roots. Roughly speaking, we're about 120 people in total, about $450 million a year, all to philanthropic causes around the world. So a really dynamic and great place, and very excited to partner with OpenIDEO on this. Why don't we do next slide? And I'll talk a little bit more about our cyber effort. The Cyber Initiative, Monica and I, being 2/3 of our team, launched in 2014. And this is the Hewlett Foundation's newest grant-making area. The real focus here is to say that cybersecurity and digital technologies now permeate all aspects of our lives. And to be frank, governments and the private sector are struggling to think strategically about how do we keep people safe? How do we build more resilient and secure systems? How do we ensure that our systems are trustworthy? And so we've launched a 10-year grant-making effort, really trying to say, we don't know the solutions to these hard problems, but what we want to do is build a field of people who have a mix of technical and legal and policy and business and now visual design and arts expertise to bring to bear on these multifaceted challenges. And really what we're trying to do is build a field by investing in think tanks, in universities to educate people, and in a better way of communicating about these issues, to translate all that great work and make it accessible. And that's really where this effort comes in, is that it's a real real important part of the third piece of our strategy, helping people communicate and talk about these issues in a more intelligent, accessible way. Because right now we really don't know how to do that. The words are getting better, they're still imprecise, but the visual language is lagging quite badly. And just to sort of use the picture in front of you, that sort of image, we commissioned a graphic designer to basically try to come up with something, and it's essentially an Apple keyboard where each of the keys is some sort of IoT connected device or building, and is a simplistic attempt to try to capture the complexity of these important issues, and that is sort of a step forward from the existing visuals. And so just to say, there's a big challenge there, and that's how it, I think, fits into our broader grant making. That's a little bit about us. Why don't I hand it over to Betsy, and Betsy can say a few words about herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Betsy Cooper. I am currently the director of the Aspen Tech Policy Hub, which is generously supported by the Hewlett Foundation. It's a pleasure to be here. I really share all of the interest in building better imagery, and I'm excited to see this new project and to help out where I can. My background, I worked for a significant period of time in government, first on the Homeland Security side, and then eventually transitioned into doing a lot of work on cybersecurity and information technology at the Department of Homeland Security. After that, I moved over to UC Berkeley, where I was the executive director, the founding executive director of the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, which is an organization focused on building the future of cybersecurity. And it was here that I first really noticed the lack of imagery, the person in hoodie, the zeros and ones. We would try to make these reports and just were completely unable to come up with anything innovative. And so about a year ago, I moved on to start the Aspen Tech Policy Hub. We're an incubator that focuses on training technologists how to engage in the policy process. So designers, engineers, startup founders, academics are all welcome to join our program and engage in learning the policy process through a paid in-residence fellowship program. And again, we're trying to create infographics, cool outputs that policymakers will actually use. And we're still struggling to find these solutions. So really looking forward to the conversation.
Great, I'll pass it over to Beau.
Thanks.
You may have to come off of mute. Oops. I'm not sure if we can hear you, Beau.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
Oh, great. Technology failure from the technology person. Ironic. So I'm a security researcher, aka white hat hacker. My background is in more the technical side, and I've come to public policy fairly recently, within the last 5 years or so. I am a fellow with the Atlantic Council, working with the Cyber Statecraft Initiative. I also am one of the leaders of the global grassroots initiative called I Am the Cavalry, which attempts to bring security researchers and public policymakers together in ways that impact human life and public safety. So cars, medical devices, airplanes, any place where bits and bytes meet flesh and blood. And looking around, surveying the available stock photos, any kind of images, over the last 15 years as I've been in this community, in this industry, there's very little accurate representation of what a hacker actually is, what hacking actually is. So I'm really excited for this challenge to be able to hopefully draw out what some of the alternative images could be to help imagine what, or help kind of spark a vision in people's minds of actually what this complex topic is, hopefully communicating in simple visual language to everyone.
Perfect, thanks, Beau. We're going to move forward and just talk a little bit about why we're doing this work and what the challenge is all about. So I'll let the Hewlett Foundation speak a bit about where this came from. Great,
thanks, Chelsea. I'll start, and then Monica, feel free to please chime in as well. So the origin of this really is that as we have been making grants to build a field of cybersecurity practitioners, experts, scholars broadly defined, we've realized more and more that one of the fundamental challenges here is we don't have an agreed upon language. We don't have an agreed upon vocabulary and definitions of key terms. And it makes it really hard then to bridge the different, tribes, if you will, or stakeholder groups who all are interested in similar issues but can't actually communicate because there are essentially translation barriers. And then even more perhaps challenging, or perhaps even more important, is making this stuff accessible to, say, a member of Congress who doesn't even understand how the internet works, let alone how a piece of digital technology interfaces with it, and then the security challenges and how it could actually harm a person. Because at the end of the day, this is all about people, and the people are the ones behind the keyboards who get impacted by this stuff. And so as we've continued to dig, we've realized not only do you need deep, thoughtful research and policy solutions, but you need to step back many steps and start at how do we even just talk about this stuff and make it not overwhelming and overly complicated. And so that's where over time, several grantees, think tanks, universities came to us saying, as you're writing a paper, as you're briefing a member of Congress, you don't just need words and ideas, you need a picture, you need a visual. And where they'd say, where does the Hewlett Foundation get them? And we'd say, well, we're actually struggling with the same challenge. And so it became clear after multiple requests for help that this was a problem that the field as a whole is facing. And all you need to do is do a Google image search, which is captured here on the slide, to see sort of how there are very limited depictions of these issues. And it's generally bucketed, the ones and zeros, the locks and swords and shields and sort of security and, defensive like motifs. The people in hoodies, generally white men, so on and so forth. And it's not accurate, it's not nuanced, it doesn't actually educate. And so that's a problem because, all of you on this line read the newspaper, and every day there's a new city being, held ransom by ransomware. You're seeing nation states attack each other in cyberspace. And it's not to say that we're trying to say that fear-mongering. It's hard to figure out what the right policy answer or solution is if you don't actually have a way to talk about it and to tell a story. And so that's where this project really comes in, is that we were animated by a demand from nonprofits in the space and people we hold in very high regard, and validated that based upon our own experience, saying, yeah, we struggle with our website, with our reports. Where do we get images? And so it took us a little while to really say, you know what, we're going to focus some resources around this. But that's essentially how it came to be. I don't know, Monica, if you want to add anything to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, just to echo everything you just said, we think it's really important to have that those images that can convey what are different facets of the field of cybersecurity, and to your point, to frankly make it more accessible to individuals that are talking about these issues, but to individuals that want to learn more about them. And so we thought this to be a current gap in the field and something that we wanted to contribute in one way or another. And you all know more than anyone, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So how can you convey issues that relate to this space in a way that is easy to understand and fun?
Yeah, and I think key to that was saying that we need a shared repository or library, which is why we believe strongly in sort of the images being usable under a Creative Commons license, so that artists, of course, will be credited, but the whole point here is to make it usable. And so that sort of like, how do we think about broadly giving back and making these images accessible and usable? Because another really a challenge in cybersecurity is that a lot of the interesting data and information is closely guarded by companies. And so there's a transparency and accessibility challenge more broadly. And so when we structured this, as Chelsea will get into, we were very keen to think about that and try to structure this in a way that whatever the output is, it will immediately be usable and shareable by a wide community, as opposed to just a very small group of people. So I think that probably covers it. I think, Chelsea, do you want to walk through the challenge brief a little bit more?
Yeah, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the challenge. Won't take too long so we can get into the panel, but on the screen here, I just want to point all of you on the call to check out, if you haven't, this full report that came from a collaboration with Hewlett Foundation and OpenIDEO to really think about the design of this challenge thoughtfully. So a lot of design research went in. You can find that on the platform. So thanks so much for sharing more, Hewlett Foundation, about how this came to be. As many of you probably know, this challenge launched about 3 weeks ago on July 25th. It closes this Friday. And as of early this morning, we had 93 contributions from 12 countries around the world. So we're really excited about that, and we're excited to see the submissions that come through in the next few days as well. And what's up on the screen here is the question that we're asking everyone. So really through this challenge, we're hoping to elevate more representative imagery to illustrate different concepts and terms in the space for use by folks that Hewlett has already mentioned: policymakers, media, researchers, educators, technologists, and more, so we can positively influence the cybersecurity space. As you get into the challenge brief online, you'll notice that we've called out 6 opportunity areas and a wildcard category. These are ones where we would really like to see some creativity come through. So through each of these opportunity areas, we share more about what we mean by them, but questions like, how can we trust devices and software that we don't really understand or have control on? How can we help people understand the different kinds of people who see themselves as hackers? What is cyber conflict, and what does that mean for everyone? So if you jump online, you'll learn more about what these are, but these are the categories we're looking through. The challenge timeline can be found online as well. At an overview, we close this ideas phase this Friday. We'll take 2 weeks to review each and every submission that comes through. And during this time period, applicants will not be able to edit their ideas. So we'll close it down so that we can review everything. So you'll have a break for about 2 weeks. When we come back on September 4th, we'll announce a shortlist, including up to 25 visual creators. And all of those folks will then have 3 weeks to seek additional inspiration, learn, receive peer and mentor support from technical experts in the cyberspace, and really think about ways that they'd like to strengthen their concepts. And at that point, concepts will actually still be locked on the platform to edits, so that people can really focus their efforts off of the platform, learning and thinking and iterating. So after that, The shortlist will have 2 weeks to finalize their concept, submit it on the platform, answer a few more brief questions, and we'll go into review at the end. So we're looking at announcing the winners on October 24th. There's a few screenshots here of some of the upcoming phases, but there's a lot more information online, and you can always send us questions if you have any. So keep in mind the date of this Friday, 5 p.m. I just wanted to call out the submission form that's online. We've had a few questions come in about it. So when you log on and you go to submit your idea, you'll be asked to select one opportunity area. And you can see that on the left there. And when you select your opportunity area, you'll then be asked to sketch out 2 different ways to think about it. We really encourage applicants to just submit one application if they can, and to just really submit a strong application rather than several, as we'll be really assessing the visual creators. And you'll only be able to move forward one idea as we look into the review phase. So email us if you have any questions. There's a lot more guidance in the submission form. I just wanted to quickly call out the evaluation criteria that we're looking at during shortlisting. So here you'll see we have that we're really thinking about whether the idea is visually compelling, the artistic quality of it, and whether it expands the conversation. So that's what we're focusing on for shortlisting. When we move into final evaluation, you can see the 2 additional criteria that we'll be thinking about once you've had some time to get mentorship and support on your idea. Lastly, just wanted to call out here some resources that we have on the platform. There's a lot on there, and everything from how you can submit your idea to visual communication support. There's some translated resources in a few different languages. There's the report I showed you earlier. There's a little bit about challenge personas and who we're designing for. So there's a lot on there. Check it out. And with that, just a reminder, Friday's the deadline. Here's our email address. It's posted all over the brief. Reach out if you have any questions at all. So without further ado, we do want to shift into the panel discussion today to hear more from Eli and Monica, Beau, and Betsy to learn more about their perspectives about this space. So we'll aim to wrap that up about 10 minutes before the webinar closes so we can get to some questions. And Dima will be supporting along the way in the chat box, so feel free to share anything there. I'm just going to move forward. I'll actually stop sharing my screen, turn my video on, and hand it to you, Eli and Monica.
Fantastic, Chelsea. Thank you. I believe my colleague Eli will be joining us in in a quick second. But with that, I actually wanted to start the panel discussion with a broad framing question to both Betsy and Beau. And this was touched on a little bit during their introductions, but more generally, I wanted to ask them, why do you believe this is a challenge that we need to find solutions for? And also, why do you think it's been so hard to shift the imagery in this space? And Betsy, we can start with you. That'd be wonderful.
Sure. I first noticed this problem when trying to develop my own imagery for reports that we were publishing at the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. And you quickly found that the stock imagery was very, I would say gendered. It was very, focused on certain aspects of, an idea of a male hacker in a hoodie and zeros and ones. And so that made it very difficult for us to find things to fill out our reports. And so we ended up using sort of more generic imagery that didn't necessarily have anything to do with cybersecurity. And so then when we had the opportunity to really engage more actively, I was involved in helping to organize the Hewlett convening from a year ago, in which a number of grantees were brought together. And we tried to get designers and technical experts to talk to each other. And we did sort of this in a very short exercise, but it became very clear that there was a lot that the two could learn from each other, but a short period of time was not enough in which to really get that opportunity to engage to happen. And so we focused on that and really saw some cool ideas coming out of the ecosystem, but clearly there was more to be done, especially in that phase of translation. So one thing I'm really glad to hear about in the way this has been structured is that that's built into a process in a very, engaging way. But so I think, to summarize, there's a real lack of innovation here, and there's a broader problem, one that our hub is trying to take on, which is this conversation between between technologists and designers. And so I think you're hitting two things by initiating a program like this.
Yeah, and I think because cybersecurity is so new to most people, and because it's a field that's growing so fast and increasingly impacting our lives and the world around us, it's a situation where it's both really important to get the visuals right and really hard to get the visuals right. So it's important because the visuals create the mental images that people have and the mental models that they develop for how cybersecurity works, for how hackers operate, for who they are, for who defenders are, for the types of impacts that can happen. But it's really hard because it's a fairly abstract concept, and yet it's one that underlies a lot of our lives, right? So if you think about the images that are out there to depict electricity, it's like lightning bolts and power lines, and that's probably all that comes to mind. And yet it's a very mature a subject we have a lot of mature understanding with. It's just, it's hard to relate to. It's hard to understand at a more granular level. And I think that cybersecurity is the same way, right? As more and more of our lives depend on connected technologies, we struggle to understand what that means to us as individuals and as an entire society in many cases. So hopefully a visual language, creating some kind of a style or language or representation or accurate images even of who hackers are, who criminals are, who nation state adversaries are, et cetera, can help bring this from a highly abstract concept to something that is maybe a little bit more nuanced, and that we can have a better conversation around using some of the visual imagery as a placeholder or a mental model for how to understand and talk about it and describe the issues we're facing.
Absolutely. No, that was really insightful. Thank you both, Betsy and Beau. But as a follow-on to that question then, do you think there is anyone that is doing this right? I mean, have you seen anything that is inspiring and a creative articulation of a visual concept that pertains to cybersecurity? Although it's very abstract and it is very hard, but anything that you can shed light on?
I'll say, I just got back from DEFCON, as I know you guys are out there too. It's the world's biggest hacker conference. And if you look at the people who are at DEFCON, the types of demonstrations that are there, the community that develops around that event, it's very different than what you see even in reporting of the event itself. So in creating a document called the Lost Policymakers Guide to Hacker Summer Camp, which is like a kind of a tongue-in-cheek a travel guide, like a Lonely Planet or something for the policy community. Looking around at the mainstream Google image search, there was nothing available. But when I went to look at some of the photography from the conference from prior years, there was an amazingly rich and diverse set of images to be able to use and to pull in. And so I think that the hacker photographers actually are doing a better job than mainstream photographers. And where I've seen some of the mainstream photographers actually get embedded in the community, then they start to see the visual imagery. They start to pull things out that are really relevant. And so that's one example where I think there's maybe a nascent capability to bridge those gaps right there. Maybe a ready-made platform to just go in and start doing it, and then start developing that process and getting better images out there.
Yeah, for me, I think I've not seen tons of effective imagery in the space. I think in that exercise that we ran at the Hewlett convening, there were a couple cool ideas that came out of that. One that sort of merged some ideas about cyber health was the concept. And so they took, sort of one of a health image and kind of manipulated it to make it seem more cyber relevant. So I thought that was pretty cool. But in terms of like an organization you can look at, for for inspiration, I really think you have to look outside of cyberspace to find that sort of work. So, you know, just searching for terms like health, you see just much more robust imagery than you do, frankly, not only for cybersecurity, but for generally any aspect of technology. I don't think this is a problem that's unique to cybersecurity. It may be a bit more gendered in cybersecurity, but when I started looking for tech policy images, it's not been great either. One thing that I will say is that it's been actually really interesting to see when we talk to policymakers how much they want infographics and how much they want access to imagery as well. You know, number one thing people from Congress come and talk to us about is, can you give us a simple way to understand what you're trying to build in terms of tech policy or cybersecurity? And so I think it's worth emphasizing that it's not just that people aren't doing this well, it's that there's tremendous demand and impactful people really want this too. And so, so overall, we just do need to do better.
Absolutely, Betsy, and I could not agree more. So, you know, on that point, is there any specific support that you believe designers should have in order to create better visuals for this space? So, you know, if you could articulate, like, what are the tips or what are the different resources you think they should access in order to get those creative juices flowing? Betsy, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, with apologies for plugging my own program, so we have a program at the Aspen Tech Policy Hub, a fellowship in which we take 10 weeks. We pay people to come join us and to learn about the policy process. So we have Cybersecurity 1, Artificial Intelligence Policy 101. We teach you how policy is made. We had several designers or folks with design backgrounds in this current program, and the stuff that they're producing is amazing. It's unfortunately not public yet, but we have fellows that are creating games to enable people to understand better how, you know, how seniors, for instance, might avoid being hacked online. And we have people creating great infographics that describe new ways to engage in the policymaking process. So it really took that immersion in the program for them to get to that stage. Certainly the first week, it wasn't quite possible. And so I do think that, you know, that's not the only thing you should do is learn how the policy process works, but I do think that that was really useful for our folks. And if I'm allowed to say, our applications are due tomorrow. So any designers that might want that immersion, once you finish submitting for this project, please check us out. I think more broadly, there's definitely, in addition to immersion into the substance, I also think that sort of thinking about innovative ways to present your work is also important. So at the Hub, we take really seriously that outputs shouldn't always be super lengthy white papers that nobody reads. They should be, you know, infographics or toolkits or, you know, digital engagements, games, like all sorts of different things. And so you as designers are in a great position to apply that sort of work, but I'd really encourage you to think outside the box. Don't assume that just because policy or cybersecurity happens in a current way now means that that's the way it should continue to happen.
Yeah, and so I'd also echo one word that Betsy used, which is immersion. So we've got a number of kind of hacker artists, folks who are hackers first, but who you know, for some reason were just touched with this additional gift of being a great artist. And they've created some really cool imagery. And I think that can start as an inspiration, but also for other artists who come out and engage with hackers. We're actually a lot friendlier than the stock images portray us, as you can imagine. So like, come and engage with us, right? Come and talk to us. We can be pretty friendly folks. Happy to answer any questions. We've got a lot of times we'll do, it's almost like hacking as performance art, right? So a lot of the really good presentations and a lot of the really good hacks, they don't just demonstrate a technology thing that's abstract and esoteric. They demonstrate something that's really integrated and that kind of can hit you in the face. There's one kind of classic example of this, which is a hacker who was known as Barnaby Jack. and he hacked an ATM machine live on stage at one of these hacker conferences and just made it spit out money. So everyone sitting in the front row got a bunch of probably fake cash coming out of an ATM machine. And so that's really powerful and impactful. And then being able to translate something like that into a visual language. I mean, you can do it when you're there, but you have to ask questions. You have to get engaged. You have to understand how it works. One of the things that we did with one of the components of DEFCON that I run, called the Biohacking Village Medical Device Lab, is we had a patient artist come in who has a neurostimulator implanted in her. And she did this fantastic, amazing artwork of how her condition makes her feel and how the treatment makes her feel as well. So, you know, if at times the neurostimulator misfires and she gets an electric shock through her spine, she took that pain and put it into imagery that could capture that feeling for non-patients or people who don't have that particular condition or therapy. And that type of thing can be really, really powerful and impactful. I'll also throw out, throw back to the design language reference guide that was mentioned earlier on the call. It really is pretty good, and it goes through the human side of hacking, right? Who are hackers? If you don't understand who they are, how they work, what drives them and motivates them, it's really hard to capture an accurate image. And so one of the things that guide lays out is a set of motivations for security researchers or for hackers, for the white hat hackers who do it for good. And so that, as well as some of the other visual design cues in there, can really help foster a better sense of accuracy and nuance in the imagery and in the design thinking that goes into imagining what hackers and hacking and cybersecurity can be.
That's great, Bill. Thank you for that. I do believe my colleague Eli Sugarman has joined us and is going to ask a question to our panelists. So Eli, do you want to take it away? Or there may be some technical difficulties, so I'll ask the next question. So Betsy touched on this a little bit in terms of these visual challenges being present in other sectors, and I'm wondering from panelists, are there any other issues with visual language in other topical spaces, and if so, which are they?
So I can kick that off, I guess. So two where I see those challenges, one is tech policy generally. If you look at, put in technology into your Google image search, and it's not much better than cybersecurity. I think, as I mentioned, there's less of a gendered dimension to tech policy in that the hacker in the hoodie, the male sort of overtones don't come through as strongly. But nevertheless, that's an area where I think there's equal problems in terms of it's just very straightforward. It's, you know, you want to talk about a particular technology, there it is. That's the only way to visualize it, is through the object itself. So that's not great. I'd say the other one I've been involved with is in Homeland Security and defense industry. That's another area where there's quite gendered portrayals of concepts, where it's very literal. And so I think this speaks overall to the problem with the security industry generally, whether you're focused on security in the technical realm or focused on security more generally in the you know, sort of physical space. We really have a hard time thinking about how to visualize that concept. So that's definitely one that I'd flag overall as being really important to keep thinking through.
Yeah, and I'd say, you know, with technology, I'll just piggyback a little bit. In technology, there's kind of a design reference language. So if you think about like the icons on your phone, they tend to update fairly often as new aesthetics change, as new style changes, as you know, we get more comfortable with the technology itself. And that's driven by, you know, Google, by Microsoft, by the big companies out there who own the platforms. And I think that in those cases, there is actually an amazing set of visual style. Now, that doesn't always translate into imagery. So imagery you'll still have problems with. But, you know, if you think back 5 or 10 years ago, everything in the design space for technology was skeuomorphic, right? So it tried to resemble something that existed in the physical world. If you think about like the save a file button on most, even today, most computers it's like an old floppy disk. And, there's probably not too many people out there who use a computer today who ever actually used floppy disks. So like, if the technology imagery can change through a bunch of passionate as well as motivated people who are changing that design imagery for technology, then there's no reason we can't change the design imagery for security, for cybersecurity, for cyber policy. It'll just take a little bit more cross-pollination of ideas, of understanding, across the two disciplines. And so I think that's one of the things that this program can really foster and develop.
Fantastic, Beau. I appreciate that. I wanted to make sure I gave my colleague Eli a chance to ask a couple of questions.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Am I coming through? Or?
You are, yeah, great, Eli.
Sorry, I have had recurrent technical challenges, which goes to, again, the importance of this challenge. So I think, Beau and Betsy, I think you both had some really good examples. And I think one of the areas of real opportunity here is trying to make sense of how people should feel about cybersecurity and related technology issues. And oftentimes people feel a little bit helpless, I think, because they don't understand these issues or they feel they're too complex.
Are others hearing Eli okay, or is it coming through skipping? Okay. Yeah, Eli, I think the phone is skipping right now, so we can't quite hear you. Monica, I wonder if we should pass it back over to you.
Sure. Yes, yeah. Coming in and Eli should be joining us in a little bit, so apologies for the technical difficulties. I did want to pose another question to Beau and Betsy, and this is I'm trying to get a sense of what are your guys' hopes with hopes and dreams for reimagined visual language for cybersecurity. What are you hoping to see after the fact? And Beau, if you want to kick us off, that'd be great. And I should note that I admire your DEFCON flag behind you. It really sets the mood for the webinar.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I hope is that a visual language or a set of good images can really help capture in a snapshot some of the nuance, some of the depth, some of the really important things about cybersecurity, about cyber policy. I have actually a degree in psychology, and so we spent a lot of our course of study thinking about how people think and talking about how people think and designing things to map to that. And so one of the things that's very apparent is that if you can capture the subtlety and the nuance of a thing in an image, then it helps people think about it much, much better. So one of the classic examples is that the way you use your air conditioner at home is different than in a car, because the way it works is different. So at home, your air conditioner is always pumping out the same amount of air conditioning power at the same temperature. In your car, your fan goes up and down. The temperature may go up and down as well in the amount of air it's putting out. So it's very, very different. If you don't have an accurate mental representation of those two things, it's really hard to use them. And I think that the same thing is true in cybersecurity. If you don't have an accurate mental representation of what it is or what you're trying to accomplish or who the people are in it or the types of consequences that can come, then it's really hard to understand and relate. But once you do get those visuals, you can start to unlock those better neural pathways, the better analogies that can come out of it. And so you have really, you're equipping the entire population to be able to understand things better, as well as specifically targeted things to people who have different frames of reference, be it policymakers or technologists, et cetera.
Great. And just to add on from that, I guess I have three sort of main asks. I mean, one would just be the basic stock images. It would be awesome if we had 5, 6, 10 cool new ways to think about these questions other than the hacker in the hoodie and those zeros and ones. That would be awesome. Second would be really new ways of thinking about these abstract concepts. So I mentioned security as being an obvious one. Like, what does it mean to be secure? How do you get the visceral emotional reaction? How do you help technical people tell their stories better? And so I'd love to see new ways of thinking about representing these abstract ideas, similar to the example I gave where cyber health then combined images from cyber and health, and that kind of helped bring that to the forefront. So I thought that's a good example of how that could work. And then finally and selfishly, as designers, I'm always looking to bring in new voices for how to do new policy outputs generally. So, and so we're trying to really think about infographics and games, as I mentioned, in different ways of expressing images. So I hope that beyond sort of quote unquote stock imagery, that you all use your creativity to show us new ways of representing things overall, whether it be through interactive animations or, a sculpture or, a museum, whatever it might be. And I'm making stuff up, and maybe that's beyond the scope of what you can do for this project. But I'd push you not just to think about new ways to represent individual images, but new ways to sort of translate these broader concepts using your creativity and using new forms of representation overall, because we could all benefit from that as well.
Thank you so much. Monica, do you have anything else before we turn over to some of the guests' questions?
No, Chelsea, I just wanted to thank everybody on the call and shout out a special thank you to both Betsy and Beau for taking the time to join us on this webinar. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We have just a little bit over 10 minutes left, so I wanted to pass the microphone to Dima, who's our community fellow for this challenge, and ask her to share any of the pre-submitted or live questions that have come through in the chat box for our panelists.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thanks for the great panel. That was super interesting to think about new ways that we can tackle this challenge. So we have a lot of questions coming in. First one is from Christina, who's asking, what is the plan to get the ideas from the challenge and out to the world? So do you have any plan for presenting this possible new way of thinking and seeing cybersecurity to the major players in the space? I guess I'll direct that to Monica.
Sure, Dima, thank you for that. So our plan, I also welcome Chelsea's thoughts on this, but our plan is to get all these visual images and put them on a widely accessible website so that individuals can get access to this catalog of images, but so that they could also further develop them. I believe earlier in the conversation, Eli made reference to the fact that these will be openly licensed, of course, with credit to the individual that submitted these ideas. But the plan is to make these, again, widely accessible and in the future adaptable to different concepts as they evolve.
Super.
Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, you want to go ahead?
Nope, go ahead.
Thanks, Monica. So actually, speaking of accessibility, we have another question about that from Safa from Colorado. She was asking, how can we increase the accessibility of high quality and comprehensive graphics for cybersecurity issues for nonprofits who do not often have the budget for that? They don't have the budget for licensed images for their report covers, for their events. So how can we really keep in mind this accessibility in our challenge?
Yeah, I can hop on that, and if others want to build, feel free. I think the intent with this challenge, at least in response to that question, is for these to be available freely. So no cost associated would be the hope. And so, yeah, we do intend for anyone to be able to use these, whether it's an academic institution, a nonprofit, policymakers. So our hope is for that to be the way things move and to help support a new set of visual creators who can continue to build images over time, so it will just flourish and grow. If there's anything folks would like to add, feel free.
I'd add one thing, which is just that, at the Hewlett Foundation convening and again through the Aspen Tech Policy Hub, we also try to support young designers. So we have an intern this summer who is a designer who is really trying to engage with our fellows to help them supplement what they're already able to do. When we were organizing the Hewlett convening, we got graduate student designers to engage. And for many of those folks, they're looking equally for an opportunity to build a portfolio as they are for the opportunity to actually, be paid for their work. And so we try really hard to provide those opportunities. And I'd urge everyone here to find those young designers and to tell them about this challenge, because this really does give them the opportunity to show off their stuff, to get real world feedback in a way they might not otherwise be able to do, and to engage more going forward.
Super. Betsy, I'll ask you another question, actually. This is from Peter from Oakland. Peter was wondering, where do you find the intersection between governmental policies and private initiatives relating to multi-tiered cybersecurity?
Oh, wow. Well, there's a good one.
That's in the conversation.
Yeah. So, I think for me, we really focus on the fact that companies build policy too. So in many areas, cybersecurity being one of them, oftentimes big companies will have more knowledge of what's happening in cybersecurity. Have they been facing hacks? What are the latest in terms of phishing scams? And by deciding what to do with that information are essentially setting policy for the rest of us. And so there needs to be more engagement between government and the companies in order to encourage the setting of policies that matter for all of us. And so, that's yet another reason why something like this is so important, because right now you sort of have three tiers of communicators. You have hackers, you have the companies, and you have the government, and they're not always talking to each other using the same language or sharing concepts together. And so this provides a great opportunity to sort of improve upon that.
Yeah, and I'd say so if you were at DEFCON 10 or 15 years ago, you heard a lot of talks about the potential perils of social media, potential benefits, but also potential perils. You heard a lot about the convergence of safety with security. And now if you look to what the public policy discussions have been over the last 2 or 3 years, they echo that, right? So I think if you want to kind of forecast the future, as a lot of policymakers do, they want to get ahead of things. Go check out a hacker conference, get engaged in that community. And actually this year we saw a ton of public policy community come out to DEFCON. So we had at least 4 members of Congress at DEFCON, the world's biggest hacking conference, at least 15 staffers that I know about. We had folks from the FTC who had been going for a while. We had members of especially DHS, a ton of folks from DHS, from OMB, from other government agencies, including the White House. So there's starting to be this kind of drumbeat of more policy engagement at hacker conferences, which I think is a good thing, as well as going the other way. So more hackers, folks like myself who are coming to DC regularly to brief people who are getting called from state and local, as well as federal representatives or other agencies. And I think that can help us bridge the gap, where public policy and Congress and laws are usually farther behind, sometimes by definition or by desire, than the technology that they're supposed to be overseeing. Some of the concepts translate between the physical world or societal goals and objectives into the technology, and those types of conversations we want to lead rather than be behind, so that when it's time to make laws, we can actually be ready for them with technically competent, technically literate approaches, rather than kind of the, being way behind and playing whack-a-mole for every little issue that pops up that's a symptom of an underlying root cause.
Thanks a lot, Beau, for that. And actually, speaking of being really ahead, so we've had a lot of questions coming in about Medium, and I know, Betsy, you touched upon that, and the sky's the limit, and we really want to encourage people to think outside of what's already happening. But we've had some questions around what's already existing now with stock imagery, and how do you feel about drawn visual or artworks versus compositions that use photography, photos, and text. So I don't know if you want to jump in and tell us a bit more about what you're thinking about, what the current view is, but also where do we want to go? Where do we want to head with this challenge?
I mean, from my perspective, I think it takes all types of mediums. So I mentioned pulling up some photographs from hacker photographers, and DEFCON actually has a media server where they post thousands of photos from every year's event. So that might be a good source of images to go mine if you want to enter the competition or just to use them somewhere else. But also, those can only tell part of the story, right? So because so much of cybersecurity is really abstract, because it's the meeting of software, which is already an abstract concept, with security, which is an abstract concept, you're layering on these abstractions. So there's going to have to be some kind of a representation that's more conceptual and less concrete in order to help bridge those gaps. And you could do, that could be digital art. So it could be something that's, on a wall, like a giant monitor that morphs and changes over time. It could be something that's more physical. So, for instance, one of the cool, fun things to teach people about hacking or to get them interested in the security idea that everything is defeatable is lock picking, right? So you get people with their hands on a lock and physically breaking it. That's a tactile as well as a visual act. I don't know how you might translate that into art, but it could be an inspiration. And as I mentioned earlier, you also have some of the best hacks and some of the best presentations of hacking are akin to performance art, right? They evoke a certain idea in the audience or break a certain barrier to show concepts that, when juxtaposed, seem in contradictory, but actually exist together.
Very briefly, unfortunately, I'm going to have to jump in a second because we're hosting our last webinar for the Aspen Tech Policy Hub starting in 1 minute. But the difference between the stock images and the photography, photography versus graphic design, both are very similar right now. It's just a matter of whether you have a photograph of a person in a hoodie with zeros and ones over them, or whether you have it sort of animated or cartoon drawn out. So there's lots of space in both. I do think that overall, taking what Beau has said, there is more photography that we could rely on. We don't always have access to it, but there's more photography out there from, hacker conferences and from events. And so because of the Hewlett Foundation's tremendous support of a number of cybersecurity organizations, we're just growing a repository of that. And maybe a separate problem is, where should that be stored to make it accessible? Maybe there's a place that people could have access to get access to that information. So I think there's less in the way of sort of illustration at this point, but both would be required, and certainly more abstract photography that fits the bill would also be a weakness from my perspective.
Thank you all. We're just